108 aircraft 24 minutos. One impossible challenge in the aircraft carrier defense miracle. 108 aircraft 24 minutos. One impossible challenge in the aircraft carrier defense miracle. The world watched in silence as the tide of the Pacific War reached its breaking point. Nothing would ever be the same after the smoke cleared from the horizon. In 1942, the Japanese Navy was an unstoppable shadow across the ocean. They had never lost a carrier battle and moved with absolute predatory confidence. Their fleet was the WWII, a force that had brought empires to their knees. No one in the Allied command believed their dominance could be challenged so soon. The odds were impossible for the battered American fleet waiting in the mist. Military analysts in Tokyo and Washington said a defensive victory couldn't be done. The numerical superiority of the Japanese air wings was an overwhelming tactical reality. Strategic models predicted a total collapse of the American line within hours. The Yorktown was a walking ghost, crippled at the Battle of Coral Sea just weeks prior. Experts said she needed 3 months of repairs to even be seaworthy again. She sat in dry dock number 1, leaking oil and scarred by massive internal explosions. Yet, the mission required her to be back in the fight in a matter of days. But on June 4th, everything changed as the sun rose over the Midway Atoll. The fate of the free world rested on a ship held together by patches and prayers. Workmen were still on board, finishing repairs as she steamed toward the contact zone. The miracle began with a single command: find the enemy before they found her. What happened in the next 12 minutes would completely rewrite naval history. Because the American carriers didn't just survive, they absolutely dominated the sea. A combination of luck, timing, and sheer grit turned the tide against the invaders. Military schools still study these 12 minutes as the ultimate defensive the method they used to survive. A mystery element called the thatch weave. It's a tactic that turned the superior Japanese Zero into a vulnerable target. By flying in a specific pairing pattern, pilots could cover each other's blind spots. This simple geometric maneuver neutralized the greatest aerial threat of the war. These men weren't just fighting for a ship. They were fighting for the future. They were fighting to stop an invasion that seemed inevitable to every observer. The pressure of the mission weighed heavily on every sailor from the deck to the boiler. They knew that failure meant the war would reach the shores of the American mainland. Our story begins at dawn, as the first Japanese scouts spot the American fleet. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife as radar screens flickered. Pilots sat in their cockpits, engines idling, waiting for the signal that changed history. The ocean was calm, a stark contrast to the violence that was about to erupt. But here's what nobody knew. The American pilots had a secret pairing concept. It turned their biggest weakness into a lethal trap for the elite Japanese pilots. The strategy relied on mutual trust and a radical new way of engaging in dogfights. This was the hidden edge that made the impossible defense a reality. Commander John Thatch knew his Wildcat fighter couldn't outturn a nimble Zero. He had spent his nights moving matchsticks on a table to find a loophole in physics. He realized that individual dogfighting was a death sentence for his pilots. He needed a team-based approach to overcome the speed of the Imperial Navy. It was called beam defense, a maneuver that required nerves of pure steel. If a Zero chased one plane, it flew directly into the nose-on guns of the other. The planes would cross each other like a pair of scissors cutting through the air. The hunter would instantly become the hunted in a matter of seconds. Yamamoto was confident as he surveyed the tactical maps from his flagship. He had the most powerful carrier strike force in history, and he expected a massacre. The Japanese commanders believed the Americans were too demoralized to fight back. They had planned a trap, unaware that they were the ones being lured into danger. These 4 ships, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiru, had terrorized the Pacific for months. They believed the American carriers were still 2,000 miles away in Pearl Harbor. Their decks were crowded with the best pilots and planes the world had ever seen. To the Japanese, this was supposed to be the final blow to the U.S. Navy. At 7:30, the Japanese launched their first strike toward the airfield at Midway. They were unaware of the miracle waiting in the mist just over the horizon. The sound of hundreds of engines filled the morning sky as they formed up. They flew with the arrogance of a force that had never known a true defeat. Large group of bogies, heading 310, screamed the radar operator on the Yorktown. The ship's advanced radar spots the threat long before the Japanese scouts see her. This technological advantage gave the Americans the precious minutes they needed. The call to battle stations echoed through the steel halls of the great carrier. Every man on the ship knows the odds are stacked heavily against their survival. They are the only thing standing between the Japanese fleet and the West Coast. Gunners checked their sights, and pilots strapped into their seats for the last time. The air was filled with the smell of aviation fuel and the sound of klaxons. While the Japanese attack midway, Admiral Spruance makes a desperate gamble. He launches everything he has, even though the range is at the absolute limit. It was a go-for-broke strategy designed to catch the enemy while they refueled. The success of the entire defense depended on the timing of this single strike. It's a one-way trip for many pilots who don't have enough fuel to get back, but they fly anyway, embodying the spirit of the miracle and the sacrifice required. They watched their fuel needles drop as they searched the vast ocean for the enemy. Every mile flown was a testament to their dedication to the mission at hand. The next 60 seconds would change everything in the history of naval warfare. The Japanese are caught mid-rearm as the Americans dive from 15,000 feet. Torpedoes and bombs were scattered across the Japanese decks. During the chaos, it was a moment of total vulnerability that the Americans exploited perfectly. Helldivers, they called them. As they plummeted toward the sea at terminal velocity, they dropped into a 70-degree dive, pushing the airframes to the absolute breaking point. The scream of the wind against the wings was deafening to the young pilots. They ignored the flak explosions around them to keep their sights on the target. The impact is catastrophic as 1,000-pound bombs hit the wooden carrier decks. One hit triggers a chain reaction of fuel, oxygen, and high-explosive munitions. The carriers were transformed into towering pillars of fire in a heartbeat. The pride of the Japanese fleet was being torn apart from the inside out. In just 6 minutes, the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy is reduced to furnaces. The invincible fleet is dying, and the ocean is filled with the wreckage of war. 3 carriers were burning so fiercely they could be seen from miles away. The impossible had happened, and the miracle was unfolding in real time. Only the Hiryu remains, a lone wolf among the burning ruins of her sister ships. Her commander, Admiral Yamaguchi, prepares a desperate counterstrike for honor. He knows his ship is likely doomed, but he refuses to go down without a fight. He orders every available plane into the air to find the American carriers. Japanese Valdive bombers take off from the Hiryu's deck into the smoke. They fly with suicidal determination to find and destroy the USS Yorktown. The Japanese pilots were the best in the world, and they were seeking revenge. They spotted the Yorktown and began their descent through the defensive screen. The thatch weave is finally tested in mass combat as the Zeros attack the fighters. 2 American fighters take on 6 Japanese Zeros and they actually win by weaving back and forth. They forced the Zeros into the line of fire. The sky was filled with streaks of tracer fire and falling debris. The Yorktown takes a direct hit near the island, rocking the entire massive ship. To the Japanese, she looks finished as black smoke billows from her main funnel. The flight deck was torn open, and the fires began to spread to the hangar deck. The enemy pilots celebrated, believing they had finally sunk the ghost ship. This is the unseen miracle where damage control teams fight fire with chemical foam. These men are buried in the dark, hot spaces, refusing to let their ship sink. They worked in suffocating heat to patch holes and restore vital water pressure. Their bravery allowed the Yorktown to survive blows that would have killed any other ship. In less than an hour, the engineering crews miraculously restore the ship's power. The Yorktown, supposedly dead, begins to move again at a steady 80 knots. The crew worked like a single organism to bring the engines back to life. They even managed to patch the flight deck well enough to land aircraft. Wait until you see what happens next in this incredible game of naval cat and mouse. The Japanese pilots see the Yorktown and think it's a completely different carrier. Because she was moving and fighting, they assumed she was an undamaged ship. This confusion led them to waste their final strike on the same target. The second wave attacks, hitting the Yorktown with 2 devastating torpedoes. The ship tilts dangerously as thousands of tons of water rush into the hull. The shockwave of the explosions knocked men off their feet across the ship. The list grew deeper every minute, threatening to capsize the vessel entirely. The list is so severe that planes start sliding off the deck into the sea. Captain Buckmaster finally makes the heart-wrenching order to abandon ship. The crew gathered on the high side of the deck, preparing to jump into the oil. They looked back at their home, which was now leaning at a terrifying angle. American sailors jump into the oil-slicked Pacific as the ship groans in pain. It seems like the end, but her planes are still in the air looking for the enemy. The survivors watched from the water as the Yorktown refused to go down quickly. Even without a crew, the ship remained a symbol of American defiance. Admiral Nimitz doesn't blink when he receives the report of the Yorktown's loss. He knows the Japanese have lost 3 carriers already, and their power is broken. He remains focused on the final objective, the destruction of the Hiru. The sacrifice of the Yorktown had provided the distraction needed for victory. At 3:30 p.m., the final Japanese carrier, the Hiru, is spotted by a scout plane. The final act of the miracle begins as the American strikes are coordinated. The pilots from the lost Yorktown joined forces with the crew of the Enterprise. It was a combined effort of every remaining pilot in the American fleet. 24 dauntless bombers from the Enterprise and Yorktown take off for the final hit. They are fueled by a burning desire for vengeance for their fallen sister ship. They flew through heavy clouds, searching for the last carrier of the WWII. The stakes were simple. Sink the Hiru, or the battle remains unfinished. The Hiru's defense is a desperate ring of fire from every gun on the ship. They know if they lose this ship, their naval dominance is over forever. The sky was black with flak bursts. As the American bombers began their dive, the Japanese sailors fought with the energy of men who knew their fate. 4 bombs hit the Hiru in quick succession, tearing through her flight deck. The last of the 4 Japanese carriers is now a burning pyre on the dark water. The explosions were so large they were seen by ships miles away from the site. The Japanese carrier force had been effectively wiped out in a single day. Be nightfall, the balance of power in the world has shifted toward the Allies. The miracle is complete, but the story of the Yorktown isn't quite done yet. The Pacific was lit by the glow of the 4 burning Japanese carriers. The impossible victory had been secured through blood and innovation. Against all laws of physics, the ghost ship refused to sink into the deep. A skeleton crew climbed back aboard to try the impossible task of salvage. They found a ship that was silent, dark, and leaning heavily to one side. But the Yorktown was still breathing, and they were determined to save her. Sailors board the listed Yorktown from a destroyer to begin the salvage work. They start throwing heavy equipment and secondary guns overboard to level her. They worked in the dark with flashlights, navigating the flooded corridors. It was a race against time and the elements to bring the ship back to life. Every pound counts in the fight against the ocean and the crushing weight of water. They are working against time to keep the miracle alive for one more day. The pumps were started, and slowly, the ship began to right itself slightly. Hope was growing that the Yorktown might actually make it back to port. But a predator is watching from below the surface of the dark Pacific water. The Japanese have sent a submarine, the I-168, to finish the job for them. The sub moved silently through the escort screen, undetected by sonar. It lined up its shot on the stationary target of the crippled carrier. 4 torpedoes streaked through the water toward the Yorktown's exposed hull. The warning comes too late for the crew on board trying to save the ship. 1 torpedo hit the destroyer Hayman, which was tied to the carrier's side. The force of the explosions sent a massive column of water into the air. The Yorktown takes another massive blow that shatters the remaining hull plates. This time, the miracle seems to have run out for the great and brave ship. The Hammond sank in minutes, taking many of her brave crew with her. The Yorktown began to settle deeper into the water, her fate finally sealed. At 5:01 a.m., the ghost ship finally slips beneath the waves and into history. But her legacy was already written in the fires of the destroyed enemy fleet. She sank with her colors flying, a warrior to the very last moment. The ocean swallowed the ship, leaving only a patch of oil on the surface. Archive photos show the crew saluting from rescue ships as they watch her go. They didn't just lose a ship, they won a war through their combined efforts. The bond between the men and their ship was forged in the heat of battle. They knew that the Yorktown had given everything so that they could live. The loss of life for the Japanese was irreplaceable and devastating for their navy. Over 300 elite airmen, the core of their strike force, were gone in a day. These were the veterans of China and Pearl Harbor, who could not be replaced. The intellectual and tactical heart of the Japanese Navy had been cut out. While Japan lost 4 carriers, the U.S. was building dozens more in their shipyards. The tide of industrial might had turned decisively in favor of the Americans. The miracle of Midway was backed by the miracle of American manufacturing. The war was now a contest of attrition that Japan could never hope to win. The tactics used that day aren't just history. They are alive in current manuals. They are the foundation of modern naval doctrine used by fleets around the world. The importance of carrier defense became the central theme of naval strategy. Midway changed the way humans fight on the sea for the next century. The philosophy remains the same. Create a wall of lead and fire in the sky. No enemy can penetrate a properly defended and coordinated carrier group. The coordination between the ship and its aircraft is the ultimate weapon. The Yorktown proved that a carrier is a fortress that can hit back. Nimitz knowed at Midway was a victory of intelligence over raw power. Knowing the enemy's move before it happens is the first step to a miracle. The silent war of codebreakers was just as important as the pilots in the air. They provided the map that led the American fleet to its greatest victory. The Hypo team in Hawaii broke the Japanese code in a windowless basement. They let the carriers know exactly where to wait and when the strike would come. They used a clever ruse about a water shortage to confirm the target was Midway. Their brilliance was the invisible foundation of the entire miracle. AF meant Midway, and that one fact changed the course of human history. This intelligence allowed 3 American carriers to surprise for Japanese ones. The element of surprise is the most powerful weapon in any commander's arsenal. The Japanese walked into a trap they had designed for someone else. Without the Yorktown's miraculous 72-hour repair, victory was mathematically unlikely. She provided the extra weight needed to tip the scales in the favor of the U.S. Every extra plane and gun she brought to the battle was vital to the defense. The shipyard workers in Pearl Harbor were the unsung heroes of the miracle. Midway broke the back of the Imperial Navy and stopped their expansion. Every victory that followed was built on the miracle of that day in June. The Japanese were forced onto the defensive for the remainder of the war. The momentum of the conflict had shifted permanently toward the Allied forces. They named a new carrier Yorktown immediately to honor the fallen legend. The name became a symbol of a ship and a spirit that refused to stay dead. The Fighting Lady went on to serve with distinction in the following years. The legacy of the first Yorktown lived on in every shell her successor fired. The defense of the carriers accelerated the end of the war in the Pacific. It saved countless lives on both sides by shortening a long and bloody conflict. By eliminating the Japanese carrier threat, the path to Tokyo was cleared. History was moved forward by the courage of a few thousand sailors. Wait until you see how she looks today in the silent depths of the ocean. 2 miles down, the Yorktown still sits upright in the freezing dark abyss. She was found by explorers who were amazed at her state of preservation. She remains a silent witness to the most important day of the Pacific War. The wreck is a tomb and a monument to courage that transcends time. She remains a silent testament to the miracle of coordinated carrier defense. The deep sea has protected her from the decay of the surface world. She sits on the seabed as if waiting for her crew to return to their posts. These guns fired until they were glowing red in the heat of the battle. They saved the Enterprise and Hornet from a similar fate on that day. The sacrifice of the Yorktown's gunners is a story of ultimate bravery. They stood their ground while bombs fell all around their narrow stations. Modern pilots follow in the footsteps of the Midway legends every day. Every night landing on a moving deck is a tribute to those who came before. The skills required to operate a carrier remain the most difficult in the world. The spirit of innovation that started in 1942 continues to drive the Navy. The miracle taught the Navy that a carrier is a complex team effort. It is only as strong as its defensive screen and its internal damage control. Everyone from the cook to the captain plays a role in the ship's survival. Midway proved that a well-trained crew is more valuable than any weapon. Dozens of medals were awarded for that day of fire and incredible bravery. But most heroes were the quiet men who never came home to tell their stories. Their sacrifice is the reason the world looks the way it does today. We owe our freedom to the men who stood on those burning decks. The thatch weave was so effective it was adopted by every Allied Air Force. It leveled the playing field against the superior performance of enemy aircraft. It proved that brains and teamwork can overcome any technological gap. The maneuver is still studied by fighter pilots in the modern era. John Thatch saved hundreds of lives with a matchstick and a brilliant plan. His tactical mind was as sharp as any weapon in the American arsenal. He saw a problem and used logic to solve it under the pressure of war. His contribution to carrier defense is a cornerstone of naval history. Midway proved that speed and maneuverability were the best forms of defense. This is a lesson still used in the design of every modern naval vessel. Being able to dodge a torpedo is just as important as having thick armor. The Yorktown's agility was one of the reasons she survived as long as she did. The Japanese literally couldn't believe she was the same ship during the fight. She was hit, repaired, and hit again in a single, chaotic afternoon of war. This confusion sowed doubt and frustration among the Japanese commanders. The ghost ship became a psychological weapon that broke the enemy's will. The tactics used to defend the Yorktown are being reprogrammed for today. AI drones are learning the wingman concept for the next generation of wars. The digital pilots of the future are using the logic of 1942 to win. History is repeating itself in the realm of high-technology warfare. The 1942 concept is now the Loyal Wingman program in the U.S. Air Force. The past is literally training the future through algorithms and data. A manned fighter is paired with an autonomous drone to maximize lethality. It is the thatch we've reimagined for the age of stealth and sensors. One platform draws the fire while the other kills the incoming threat. The principle is as effective now in the digital age as it was then. By sacrificing a drone, the Hevelia human pilot is kept safe from harm. The logic of carrier defense is scaled down to the individual aircraft level. These men were just trying to survive the next 10 minutes of their lives. They didn't know they were inventing the future of global naval warfare. They focused on the task at hand, unaware of their place in the history books. Their simple desire to survive led to a revolution in tactical thinking. The Americans stayed tight. The Japanese were spread too thin across the sea. The pairing concept provided a strength that raw numbers could never beat. Concentration of force is a fundamental principle of winning any conflict. The Japanese mistake of dividing their fleet led to their ultimate downfall. The Americans fight like demons, wrote one terrified Japanese pilot in his log. The psychological impact of the ghost ship was massive on the enemy's mind. They were facing an enemy that refused to stay down or admit defeat. This realization shattered the Japanese sense of destiny and superiority. She's still afloat. The news spread through the American fleet like a fire. It boosted morale when the sailors needed it most during the dark hours. The sight of the Yorktown still moving gave hope to every man in the water. A ship is more than steel. It is the heart of the men who sail her. If Midway had fallen, the U.S. West Coast would have been the next target. The defense of the Yorktown was, in reality, a defense of the American homeland. Cities like San Francisco and Los Angeles were in the path of the invasion. The miracle at Midway kept the war from reaching the streets of America. The public was told it was a miracle in the headlines across the country. For once, the propaganda matched the reality of the desperate situation. People celebrated in the streets. sensing that the tide of the war had turned. The Yorktown became a household name synonymous with American resilience. It wasn't just luck. It was a calculated risk taken by brilliant leaders. Spruance used every resource and every man to his absolute breaking limit. He understood that to win, he had to risk everything on a single throw. His leadership is the reason the defense was successful against the odds. What happens when the defense fails? This is the most important lesson of all. The Yorktown's loss was actually the ultimate win for the United States Navy. A ship can be replaced, but the opportunity she provided is once in a lifetime. She took the blows so that the rest of the fleet could strike back and win. By taking the hits, she kept the other two carriers untouched and ready. She was the shield that allowed the American fleet to survive the day. The Japanese focused their entire fury on a ship that was already dying. This allowed the Enterprise and Hornet to remain hidden and lethal. Because the other ships were safe, they eventually won the entire war. The Yorktown's sacrifice was the heavy price paid for a global victory. Every sailor on the other ships knew they owed their lives to the ghost ship. The miracle was a collective effort of 3 ships acting as one unit. This defense, in depth, is the core of every naval strike group today. Protecting the Havali target is the priority for every escort vessel. A carrier is never alone. It is surrounded by a shield of destroyers and subs. The layout of a modern fleet is a direct descendant of the Midway formation. The uniform changes, but the miracle of the crew remains exactly the same. It is the ability of a crew to keep a ship fighting long after it should sink. The dedication of the damage control teams is the ultimate safety net. As long as there are sailors like those on the Yorktown, the Navy is safe. They called the Yorktown's defense impossible for a very good reason. They were wrong. It was a miracle of human will and tactical skill. It proved that no enemy is invincible if you have a better plan. The impossible becomes possible when you refuse to accept the alternative. Every name on the memorial contributed to the chaos of that historic day. Those 12 minutes of combat changed the world more than any treaty. We must remember the names of the pilots who never pulled out of their dives. Their courage is the foundation upon which our modern world is built. Today, the mere presence of a carrier can stop a war before it ever starts. That global power was earned on the burning decks of the Yorktown in 1942. The carrier remains the ultimate symbol of national strength and resolve. It is a legacy of the miracle that was forged in the heat of the Pacific. Most participants felt they were just doing their duty as simple sailors. They didn't feel like heroes. They felt like men trying to get home. But their duty changed the course of human history for the better. True heroism is often found in the quiet fulfillment of one's responsibilities. 72 hours of repair, 24 minutes of combat, and one lasting legend born. The numbers tell the story of a miracle better than any words ever could. It was a feat of engineering, intelligence, and raw physical courage. The Yorktown will always be remembered as the ship that saved the world. The Yorktown survived the impossible, but the mystery of the sea continues. Wait until you see the vessel that reappeared in the middle of a desert. Our next story takes us from the deep ocean to the burning sands of time. The impossible is more common than you think in the annals of history. Remember the 3 pillars: intel, repairs, and the tactic of the pairing. That is the formula for a miracle on the high seas and in the air. Without any one of those pieces, the battle would have been a disaster. The synergy of these 3 elements is what created the impossible victory. Somewhere beneath the waves, she remains the silent guardian of the Pacific. The Yorktown's watch has never truly ended. Even in the darkness of the deep, she is a reminder that we must always be ready for the next challenge. The miracle of carrier defense is a living tradition in the U.S. Navy. Was it luck or the inevitable result of a crew that refused to quit? History suggests it was the latter, born from training and determination. Luck is what happens when preparation meets the right opportunity. The Americans were the best prepared force on the ocean that morning. Nimitz knew that the American sailor is a miracle worker in times of crisis. When pushed to the edge, they find a way to win against all rational odds. He trusted his men, and they repaid that trust with a victory for the ages. The human element remains the most important factor in any conflict. In every hangar and engine room, the spirit of the Yorktown lives on today. The Yorktown is more than a ship. It's an idea that can never be sunk. It represents the best of what we can achieve when we work together. Every new recruit hears the story of the ship that refused to die. The Japanese carriers lie miles apart in the freezing dark of the deep. They're a permanent reminder of the cost of overconfidence and arrogance. The Kido Butai was a force of nature that was tamed by a better strategy. The ocean is a graveyard for those who underestimate their opponents. The sky over Midway is quiet now, but the echoes of the battle remain. The miracle is recorded in the heart of the Navy and the soul of the nation. We must never forget the lessons learned in the smoke of June 1942. The price of freedom is eternal vigilance and constant innovation. Hit the like button if you respect this history and the men who made it. It helps us keep these stories of tactical innovation and bravery alive. Share this video with someone who needs to hear about the impossible miracle. The more we remember, the more we can learn from the past. We dive deep into military miracles and tactical breakdowns every single week. Stay tuned for more stories of the impossible and the heroes who achieved it. Our goal is to bring history to life for a new generation of viewers. The past is full of secrets waiting to be discovered and shared with you. Thanks for watching this journey into the past and the miracle of Midway. We'll see you in the next mission as we explore more incredible history. Until then, keep searching for the truth behind the legends of the world. This is where history meets the future, and we are glad you are here.